I need to preface this video again by saying that I've had the virus over the last 2 weeks, so if my voice does sound rough, if it does sound like it's on the verge of disappearing, that's because it is. It's the most irritating thing in the world, trying to be a presenter and you can't talk. But, let's chat about this gorgeous Navitimer. The Breitling Navitimer is seen not only as an icon by the enthusiast, but is also one of the most recognizable watch designs in the world. The name Navitimer is such a strong property, and as it has evolved and developed over the decades, some have been created far better than others. Now, this new variation could be best described in a few words as refined and streamlined, but it has taken some time to get there. It's been years since I've covered the Navitimer on this channel. The simple answer is, with exception to the 806, the 765 AVI, the Copilot, the modern and vintage top times, just to name a few. But I found the modern incarnation of the Navitimer boring. Maybe boring is the wrong word. I have found them dull. There is a spark somewhere that's missing. And that's a terrible thing to say about the legend of the Navitimer, but I have to be honest. You see, it's because of the old Breitling problem. Similar to some makers today like Omega, they just offer, or they did just offer, too many variations. Within each category, the variety of models on offer can be so vast. And this can dilute the overall potency of the watch if so many variations are available. But in recent years, since 2017 under George Kern, the brand has been quietly in the background, slimming down, improving, upgrading some incredible watches. Examples like the Super Ocean, the Chronomat, the Super Chronomat, the Premier, the Heritage Collection, Top Time, with all of its partnerships. And another fine result is this new image of the Navitimer, which is refreshing. And we are seeing this consistency where the overhauls from brands like IWC with the Big Pilot 43mm, with Omega and the 3861 caliber Speedmaster. The makers are understanding where these watches belong and what made them so important. They are building on years of enthusiasm that has grown and helped develop these pieces to a point now where they're able to distill, to simplify a watch down to its core essentials. Now, the previous Navitimer debuted in 2010, believe it or not. It used the B01 chronograph, and it's easy to notice it's an earlier generation because of the flying B logo on the dial, which will be further discussed in a second. Another telltale sign that this was an earlier generation was the B anchor logo on the balance of the second hand. And then, of course, the 4:30 position date placement with a window that either matched the dial or didn't. So the visual impressions that the new generation of pieces gives you is that they look like they are drawing a lot of inspiration from the 1950s and 60s, but in a good way. They are not trying to deliberately make the Navitimer look old-fashioned, but they are letting the most important elements that have defined the style and the design of this watch speak for themselves. It's a watch now that has far less glitz and glamour and polish compared to the earlier generation of pieces. So let's discuss the logo change, because it's the first piece of this watch that you can instantly recognize that is different. It grabs your attention. The AOPA, or the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association logo, was famously seen on the 806 Navitimer of the late 50s, early 60s. And this very much replaces the original winged B logo that has been around since the 1980s. Just the logo change alone is a point of contention in itself. The enthusiast would most definitely prefer the flying B logo over this variation. I see this relationship between logos and dials, and I think immediately about another brand that is very much a partner with Breitling, and that is Tudor. Them moving away from the original Rose logo into the Shield logo. In many ways, I see it as a rebranding, a reinterpretation of how the company wants to be portrayed and seen. The Tudor Rose being one of the most important signifiers of English history. It's beautified, it's glamorous, but the shield then signifies strength, and it's far more masculine, so it does make sense why they decided to change it. With Breitling, on the other hand, we've seen so many variations with the logos, it's hard to keep up. We've gone from the full Breitling script to the winged B logo, to the single floating B logo, to the AOPA logo, and in some variations the Twin Planes logo that we saw primarily on the Copilot. And over the decades, Breitling has used these handful of logos to best suit the environment that the watch will be placed in. And now recently, under Kern ownership, we have seen the removal of complex logos in favor of the simple floating B, which rides the line of being something seriously traditional, more linked to 1940s elements, but something that's also contemporary and lines up more with the 60s. You can understand the method of why this change is happening. The brand doesn't want to be portrayed as something that represents land, air, and sea. The standard B logo is far less in your face about the themes that surround the watch. But I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that when it comes to the Navitimer, the purist will undoubtedly demand the classic winged bee. Maybe it goes against the identity of the older Navitimer, but the AOPA logo is one of my favorites. It's also one that will definitely age well on the watch because it's not stylized in any way. It's a simple applied element of a shield and a set of wings. Tying this together with the simple aesthetics from the 50s and 60s, we see so much more balance on this dial. Gone are more lines of text about chronometer rating. We see that the watch's legibility has been played with here, and where the Navitimer script has been shifted to the base of the dial. It looks far less cluttered and more purposeful. They have simplified the slide rule application. The sub-dials and the handset inside them looks far more balanced. And then of course the date window at the 6 o'clock position, something that I am a huge fan of, that I know once again is a point of contention that not everyone appreciates. There are only a handful of watches and brands in the world that place the date at the 6 o'clock position on a dial. Now yes, the big debate is that it affects the 6 o'clock marker at the base. And from a simple design point of view, the best designs are ones that are there when you need them but are out of the way when you don't. And I believe that this simple execution was handled brilliantly. It corresponds with the rest of the watch's dial. Then we look to the sizes of these pieces from 46 to 43 and to 41, with an overall thickness of under 14 millimeters, 13.6 I believe. The colors of these watches correspond with the sizes. The more masculine look will be associated with 46 millimeters, while the pastel colors go with the 41 millimeter range. This is the first time when we can critique this because the smaller sizes should also allow for the standard color arrangements like the inverted panda dial. Looking at all of these models, my favorite pick of the bunch has to be thrown up between the reverse panda and the ice blue dial. Something else that is a detractor is that these watches only have 30 meters of water resistance. This is a carryover from the earlier generation. At this stage, we should be expecting something between 50 and 100 meters of water resistance. Something else that's a bit of a critique from my end is that I wish the chronograph seconds hand wasn't red, but rather white. Something less in your face. But this does carry over from the earlier generation as well. You know, these watches were introduced before the large event at Watches and Wonders. And for the first time, I looked at the Navitimer and thought to myself, I could definitely own this watch. I think it takes a lot of dedication and commitment to be able to go to an extent where you're not overreaching with your product line. And instead of offering more, deciding to remove the excess and define the watch by what it truly represents. This is the difference, I believe, between design and marketing and selling. You can see that the creatives behind this piece, behind this range, are die-hard enthusiasts, and they understand the lineage that the Navitimer belongs to. And though yes, they have affected a couple of areas that has defined the Navitimer of the past decade, I believe in many ways they have changed this watch for the better. They haven't gone down the typical route of trying to make this watch look old-fashioned. They have instead distilled the most important features that will allow this watch to live and thrive for far longer. But the general opinion going around in the watch community is that these new Navitimers have become very competitive. And I think the agreement and understanding in the company was that you're dealing with such an iconic property, you have to do the Navitimer right. So yes, this new Navitimer, this new variation is one that we should appreciate, and that's the reason why it's getting airtime on this page. I think it was so well done. And the best part of all, which is a really hard thing to do nowadays, is to create a watch that is instantly recognizable from across the room. And maybe it's just personal preference and opinion, but I look to this watch and think that it is one of the best incarnations of the modern Navitimer that we have seen in a very long time. The simple answer is, with exception to the 806, to the 765 AVI, to the Copilot,